People keep saying something feels different about money lately, and maybe you felt it too without being able to explain it clearly, like a background noise you can't unhear once you notice it. And the strange part is that nobody officially announced a change. No global alarm rang. No single law flipped a switch, yet somehow the way money moves, grows, and even disappears feels quieter, subtler, almost invisible. So the real question becomes, what if the biggest financial transformation of our lifetime isn't loud at all? What if it's happening silently, while most people are distracted by headlines, prices, and surface-level debates? And what if understanding this shift early changes how you survive, adapt, or even win in the years ahead? Why does it feel like working harder no longer guarantees stability? And why do traditional milestones like saving diligently, owning a home, or retiring comfortably feel increasingly uncertain even for disciplined people? And how is it possible that while technology claims to make everything more efficient, more productive, more optimized, so many people feel more financially anxious than ever before? And could it be that the real story isn't inflation alone, or wages alone, or even artificial intelligence alone, but something deeper in how money itself now behaves, flows, and concentrates? Think about money not as cash or numbers on a screen, but as a system of signals, incentives, trust, and expectations. And ask yourself, when was the last time those expectations quietly shifted without you consciously agreeing to it? Because that's often how major economic changes happen. Not through dramatic collapses, but through gradual rewiring of behavior. And once behavior changes, money follows, and once money follows, power follows. So what if the silent shift isn't about money disappearing, but about money learning new paths that most people aren't looking at yet? Consider how rarely physical money is used today compared to even a decade ago, and how effortlessly value moves across apps, platforms, subscriptions, and digital services, and how this abstraction changes our emotional relationship with spending, saving, and risk. Because when money feels less tangible, decisions feel lighter, faster, and sometimes careless. So could it be that the silent shift starts right here, in how money feels rather than how much there is? And if that's true, then who benefits most from money becoming invisible and who loses awareness when the friction disappears? Why do companies now focus more on capturing attention than producing physical goods? And how did attention quietly become one of the most valuable currencies on earth without most people realizing it? And what does that mean for individuals whose time, focus, and data are constantly being converted into revenue streams for someone else, often without a clear paycheck in return? And if attention is monetized silently, then is money still earned, or is it increasingly extracted in ways that feel normal enough not to resist? Think about how algorithms now influence what you see, buy, invest in, and even aspire to, and ask, how is it possible that financial decisions once made slowly with human judgment are now shaped instantly by machine recommendations, automated nudges, and predictive models? And if money follows prediction rather than intention, then who truly controls the flow? The human making the choice or the system shaping the options? And what happens when most people don't even realize the menu is curated for them? What if the silent money shift is really about ownership slowly dissolving into access, where instead of owning assets outright, people increasingly rent, subscribe, lease, or depend on platforms for everything from entertainment to transportation to productivity? And why does this model feel convenient in the short term, but subtly erode long-term wealth building? And how is it possible that you can feel richer in lifestyle while becoming poorer in net worth at the same time without noticing the contradiction? Look at how housing, once the cornerstone of middle-class wealth, has transformed in many parts of the world into a financial instrument traded, optimized, and leveraged by institutions rather than families. And ask why owning shelter now feels like competing with algorithms, funds, and global capital flows. And what happens when the basic need for stability becomes an investment class optimized for yield instead of livability? And if that's the case, then who is housing really being built for anymore? Why does debt feel different now than it did before? And how did borrowing quietly shift from an occasional tool into a permanent lifestyle feature, embedded in education, healthcare, housing, and even daily consumption? And how is it possible that entire systems depend on people staying indebted rather than becoming financially free? And if debt fuels growth, then whose growth is it really fueling? The borrower's future or the lender's leverage? Consider how interest itself behaves in this new environment, swinging rapidly, communicated instantly, priced into markets faster than human reactions can keep up with. And to ask, What happens to people who plan their lives slowly in a world where financial conditions change at machine speed? And if timing now matters more than effort, then how many people are losing simply because they're playing a human-paced game in a machine-paced system? Why does it feel like risk has been normalized, even encouraged, while stability feels increasingly rare? And how did the narrative shift from protecting downside to chasing upside, especially for younger generations who are told to invest early, leverage aggressively, and embrace volatility as if it's a virtue rather than a trade-off? And what happens when an entire population internalizes the idea that uncertainty is normal and safety is outdated? Think about how wages relate to productivity today, and ask why, despite massive technological gains, income growth feels disconnected from effort for many people, and how is it possible that systems designed to optimize output don't automatically optimize human well-being? And if productivity no longer guarantees prosperity, then what invisible variables now decide who advances and who stagnates? What if the silent money shift is also about how value is measured, where traditional credentials, degrees, and years of experience quietly lose weight compared to adaptability, leverage, and network effects? And why does this leave so many people feeling blindsided when they did everything they were told and still feel stuck? And how does this reshape the meaning of merit in a world where scalability matters more than diligence? Look at how a single piece of software can now generate the output of thousands of workers, and ask what happens to money when labor becomes less scarce than capital, and if labor loses bargaining power while capital becomes increasingly automated. Then how do income dynamics change for the majority of people who rely primarily on their time rather than their assets? Why do some people seem to surf these changes effortlessly while others struggle just to keep up? And is it intelligence, luck, access, or simply early awareness that separates them? And what if the real advantage isn't secret knowledge, but timing? Seeing the shift while it's still subtle enough to adjust rather than obvious enough to be painful. Consider how global money flows ignore borders more than ever, while individual workers remain constrained by geography, regulation, and local economies, and ask how is it possible that capital is freer than people, and what does that imbalance mean for wages, opportunity, and inequality? And if money can move instantly but people cannot, then who holds the negotiating power? Why does inflation feel personal now, not just as an abstract statistic, but as a daily experience at the grocery store, the fuel pump, the rent bill? And how does this constant friction quietly reshape behavior, pushing people toward short-term thinking, faster spending, and reduced trust in long-term plans? And what happens to a society when patience becomes financially punished? Think about how trust underpins all money systems, and ask what happens when trust erodes slowly rather than collapsing suddenly, when people still participate but with less confidence, less optimism, and more defensive behavior? And could this explain why saving feels pointless to some while speculation feels attractive, and why stability quietly gives way to constant motion? What if the silent money shift is also psychological, where fear and opportunity coexist more intensely than ever? And how does constant exposure to market news, social comparison, and financial narratives shape our perception of what's normal? And why does it feel like everyone else is doing better even when statistics say otherwise? And how does that perception drive risk-taking, burnout, or resignation? Consider how education about money often lags behind reality, teaching models built for slower, simpler systems, and ask why schools still emphasize linear careers, delayed gratification, and static rules when the real economy rewards adaptability, optionality, and rapid learning. And how many people are entering adulthood with maps that no longer match the terrain? Why does technology promise democratization, while often amplifying concentration? And how does scale quietly reward those who already have leverage, data, or distribution? And if platforms grow exponentially while individuals grow linearly, then how does wealth distribution evolve over time without dramatic policy changes? Think about how taxation, regulation, and incentives struggle to keep pace with digital value creation, and ask what happens when systems designed for factories and offices attempt to govern algorithms and global platforms, and who benefits during the lag between innovation and oversight, and how that lag becomes a silent transfer of wealth? What if the biggest shift is that money is no longer primarily earned, but positioned, flowing toward those who understand systems, timing, and leverage rather than those who simply work hardest? And why does this realization feel uncomfortable, almost unfair? And how does society respond when effort and reward drift further apart? Why do conversations about money increasingly feel emotional, polarized, even existential? And how does uncertainty amplify narratives of scarcity or abundance? And what happens when people stop believing the future will be better than the present? And how does that belief, or lack of it, feed back into economic behavior? Consider how resilience is quietly replacing growth as a survival strategy for many households, and ask what happens when people focus on staying afloat rather than getting ahead, and how that shift changes consumption, investment, and innovation, and whether an economy can thrive when most participants are in defense mode. What if the silent money shift is also about time horizons shrinking, where long-term planning feels risky because conditions change too fast? And how does this affect everything from family decisions to business investment? And why does short-term optimization feel safer even if it undermines long-term stability? Think about how narratives shape markets and ask who controls the stories we tell about money, success, and failure, and how those stories influence behavior at scale, and what happens when narratives favor speculation, speed, and disruption over patience, stewardship, and sustainability. Why does it feel like the rules keep changing? And how does constant adaptation become a form of hidden labor that isn't compensated, but is essential just to remain relevant? And what does that mean for mental bandwidth, creativity, and well-being in a world where financial survival demands continuous learning? Consider how silence itself plays a role, how changes that aren't announced provoke less resistance, and ask whether the most powerful shifts are those that don't trigger immediate backlash because they unfold gradually, normalized step by step, until suddenly the old assumptions no longer apply. What if noticing the silent money shift doesn't guarantee success, but ignoring it guarantees struggle? And how does awareness change behavior even without perfect solutions? And why does simply asking better questions about money alter decisions over time? As you sit with all of this, feeling the weight of subtle changes rather than dramatic shocks, the real question becomes not whether the money system is changing, because that's already happening, but whether you're observing it passively or engaging with it consciously, and how that choice, repeated quietly every day, shapes your financial future in ways that rarely make headlines, but define lives.